All right, good morning, Director. Well, I can say Director Carlos this morning. I can't call him Gunter again. Good morning to you, Carlos, and good morning to all of our viewers. Thank you so much for staying with us here on the Now Morning Show. I am Natalee Legore, and we're going to be speaking with President of the Nurses Association, Idi Stuart, because the nurses are deciding that they are going to be pushing back. They're going to have 24 hours in which they literally just sit and pray. Hey! So good morning to you, Idi.
Good morning to you and your listeners. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us here. So tell us what the plan is for Friday. I'm really curious. I don't want to misrepresent what's going to happen on Friday.
Well, seeing that the association has been lobbying this present government for the last 5 years, almost 6 years now, to just regularize nursing employment in Trinidad and Tobago, just apply the human resource policies that they have set down for nurses in Trinidad and Tobago, nurses and midwives. Seeing that we have failed to do that over this last 5 years, and the government does not seem to appreciate the value of nursing and midwives throughout Trinidad and Tobago, we are deciding to call on a higher power to intercede on our behalf. So we are asking nurses for 24 hours on Friday, 1st of October, to pray in whatever manner they deem fit for 24 hours, but we're just asking them, when you are praying, that you are not interrupted. So you really need a quiet spot to pray during this period, and we look forward to nurses acceding to that call. And from the response we have been getting, nurses are definitely up for that challenge of praying for 24 hours.
But Idi Stuart, is that fair to the population who needs nurses at this time as we experience a pandemic? And even outside of a pandemic, that people need care. People need nurses to be there for them. And the reality is that it's not all nurses who aren't, on contract or who aren't permanent staff. So why do we need all nurses to be? You can't pray when you're off shift.
Well, let me answer that question in a number of areas. Firstly, I like how you say it would be very detrimental for nurses to engage in 24 hours of prayer. And that demonstrates that nursing personnel are essential. So since nursing personnel are essential, why have them on temporary employment? So that question may really be better posed to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. A matter of fact, the Prime Minister, in his own words, in an ad that we have on our social media and other platforms, is stating that he's unaware that nurses are on temporary employment. This is despite our numerous letters to him. And also he's saying there's a permanent establishment for nurses. So in his view, there's no need for nurses to be continuously temporary. And we really want to drill it home in the minds of the public.
All right, so Idi, let us get into the semantics of it. If the Prime Minister is saying there is no place, there should be permanent places for nurses, and as far as he is aware, they're not supposed to be temporary, where do you think the breakdown is happening?
Breakdown is happening when you have very clever CEOs where they seem to save money by not bringing on nursing personnel on the staff establishment and just having them on temporary. It does two things. One, you do not have to pay nursing personnel gratuity as if it was a proper contract, and you don't have to pay them pension as if they were permanent. So you put them in this limbo position where you say, well, you are continuously temporarily employed, so we could get away with not paying you all of the benefits that you would be entitled to. And secondly, it's a way to basically end your period of employment at the fancies of the employer.
Let us get into the semantics.
Decides not to renew that continuity of temporary employment, you just say, well, we no longer need you, and he could send you home. And that is untenable. The country would not allow police, fire, army, no one else, teachers, they will never allow those categories of persons in the public service to be on temporary employment. So I know the country would be in our corner.
I agree with you, I agree with you that nurses are essential workers and as such should have that place where they can get permanent employment. But I also know that how the system is designed, you're not going to have every nurse that's going to be on permanent employment just as they join the service. My question to you is, how many nurses do we have who are temporary or, as you say, on contract that are not able to enjoy gratuity, and pension? Because unless we put that into perspective, we might be here, giving false information, and I don't want to do that.
Well, we would have requested all of this information via the Freedom of Information Act. And it varies from region to region. So for instance, in Tobago, they took a policy decision that they no longer bringing on nurses permanent. So you would have in excess of 70% of the nurses on 1 year or 2 year periods of contract. In ERHA, you have something called acting nurses now. I don't know what is acting nurses. The country's alarmed about the acting commissioner. We have acting nurses in Southwest and Northwest. You have approximately about 50% on these temporary forms of employment. And in NCRHA, the major culprit, and basically where it all started, and all the other RHAs have learned from NCRHA. And because the union probably was not forceful, well, we didn't really have the nurses union only came from in 2014, 2015, because there was no one speaking on behalf of nursing personnel. That was left to mushroom. So in excess of a decade, you have the majority of nursing personnel at the NCRHA on temporary employment, 1 year temporary employment. So we have nurses retiring as we speak, not going to be enjoying any pension, not going to be enjoying any form of gratuity. And this is, we also sent the FYA to the Ministry of Health. And on the Ministry of Health staff establishment for each RHA, it demonstrates the vacancies that currently exist in all RHAs. The only 2 RHAs that actually don't have vacancies, and then you can legitimately bring persons on periods of contract with gratuity, is the ERHA and the TRHA. All other RHAs have mass vacancies. So there's no reason for a single nurse in NCRHA, SWRHA, and NWRHA to be on temporary employment or even contract.
Except that you told me the reason, though. You told me that these people don't have the money. So is that something the Nurses Association is willing to look at? Because what Absolutely is the point of bringing somebody on board if you're unable to pay them?
Absolutely not. Well, that question is so riddled with a crazy analogy. How can you bring someone to work for you if you don't have the money to pay them? I actually was listening to the Contractors Association and stuff last night. And the reason for the procurement bill, the procurement legislation, is to cure this very ill, where during periods of electioneering, you would have governments awarding contracts to contractors, even though they can't pay the contractor. But it's just a way to demonstrate to the country they're fixing roads, they're building new buildings, just because the contractor is paying them, bribing them to assist them in their campaigning. So it's the same logic. How could you bring someone to work for you knowing you can't pay them the basic salary of a nurse? How is that great? And that was actually told us, that those very words were actually told us by the Secretary of Health for Tobago, that, look, we don't really have the money to make these persons, the best we could give them is these short-term temporary employment. But how could one rationalize that in their mind?
Yeah, but Idi, hold on. While I accept what you're saying, and I also understand what you're saying, and to some degree, I agree, to some degree. But the reality is, somebody gets up, decides to go and take a job fully knowing that these are the terms and conditions of the job. How then do you go and hold the employer responsible for what the employee agreed to?
This is not the terms and conditions of the job. And this is what all we're saying. This is not the terms and condition of a job as a nurse, as a midwife, as a registered mental nurse. They have to prove that this is the terms and condition, because there are approved arrangements within the public sector, within the public service, what have you, within the RHAs, that the RHAs are obligated to follow. And if they have to deviate from those set policies, then they need the approval of cabinet. They need the approval of the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health has not given them that approval to deviate from these things and to demonstrate how this is the set standard. The very RHAs, the very government is granting our Cuban nurses who we import into Trinidad and Tobago, the very terms that we are trying to get for our locals. How could that be fair? How a union could sit down and allow that to continue? Every single Cuban nurse, and we love every single one of them, but all we want is to be paid the same way our Cuban nurses are being compensated. Is that too much to
Idi,
ask to be paid as our foreign nurses are being paid?
Before you get to the employer, my suggestion to you is to sit with those nurses who have accepted these jobs, knowing fully well that this is what they're agreeing to. Now, I hear you saying the policy within the RHAs, I think you told me yesterday when we had our talk, is that once you're employed for 6 months, after 6 months, you have to be moved to permanency. That's correct?
Correct.
Yes, so, but you still have nurses who are going. You can't say, okay, they know the situation. Everybody knows the state that the country is in financially, and everybody knows that everybody is looking a job. If I get up and I decide to come to TTT, and TTT tells me, Natalee, we can only put you on a contract, and I signed and I agree to that contract, I think it is very, very ludicrous for me to go after, join a union and say, oh, look, normally this is what TTT does, and I vex. I knew fully well what I was signing to. So even if you want to have 24 hours of prayer, shouldn't you just let those nurses pray in a quiet corner?
No, no, no. And that is the purpose of collectivism. When the employer begins to pick apart individual employees, definitely the might of the employer would always be strong of a single employee. And that is the purpose of trade unionism. That's the purpose of credit union. And that is why we have kind of moved away from that collective responsibility, and everybody's more for myself. What is in it for me? And once I am good, everybody else could go to hell.
I only have a minute and a half left with you, so I just want to ask you, if you're asking nurses to go in a quiet corner and pray for 24 hours, what do you think is going to happen to the public health system? And will you take responsibility for it if it crashes?
That question is better posed to the government of Trinidad and Tobago.
No, I'm posing it to you because you are the one who is saying nurses should go on 24 hours a prayer, not the government. The government didn't ask anybody to go and pray. When the government wants to pray, it holds it on a Sunday and everybody prays from home except those who are in the cathedral at the time.
Well, that and as we would stick with that, that is the road, because the government could change this today if they so choose. They could change this today.
And if it doesn't, I'm asking you, will you be, are you okay with the population holding you accountable if we end up with the public health system crashing?
Of course, that is the role of the union leader. If we are calling on our members, whatever repercussions emanate, then I have to take full responsibility, just as I am taking responsibility for those nurses who are on short-term employment and we have allowed it to go on for too long. We also take that responsibility. And if dialogue has failed to impress on the minds of the politician, then we must find some alternative means, because we actually wanted to come out on the streets and demonstrate. So that is why we were asking government to ease off on the SOE, so we could have come out and demonstrate. The government has continued the SOE, so we cannot come out on the street and demonstrate, so we have to find another means where we, and this is only the beginning, to be honest, this is only the beginning. Coming up, almost on a monthly basis, there would be this type of action going on in the future. So don't believe that this is a one-off. This is not a one-off. This is going to increase, and we'll be listening attentively to the budget statements by the Minister of Health in October to see if there's any rationalization of this problem, or if it will just continue to manifest.
Idi, we have to leave it there. I hope you would have kept the 24 hours day of prayer if you want to go that route until after the budget to see if anybody is going to give you some kind of leeway and give the nurses what they want. But we have to leave it there. We are out of time. Thank you so much for being with us here this morning. And I really hope that you don't send the nurses on no 24 hours. Let them pray in the mind now and go to work.
Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. Idi Stuart, President of the Nurses Association.